So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you the speaker for today. And the topic of today, of course, is labor and climate. And we will be considering climate-related occupational impacts on agricultural workers. And to present to you today, we have Maria Blancas, who I mentioned is a graduate student pursuing her PhD at the University of Washington. But first, I'll also mention that she is the winner of a very esteemed Bullitt Environmental Prize, which recognizes young people from varied backgrounds who have overcome adversity and demonstrated the ability to become powerful environmental leaders. In addition to doing her PhD right now, she completed her MPH degree in the Community-Oriented Public Health Practice Program at UW, and she is a member of the PNASH Center Outreach team and helping to provide community engagement support on the center's dairy worker and family projects. She has a breadth of knowledge. Her bio is posted on Canvas, and she told me she'll share a little bit more about the personal and professional experience that she's bringing to this work. And I'd like to call her up right now and invite you to join me in welcoming her warmly to our seminar.
Thank you.
One moment. There it is.
Yeah. Okay. With the three of us, Maria at the helm, you figured it out, and you've got your mic.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to share a little bit about my work. And before I start, I want to acknowledge that the people, past, present, and future, the Duwamish tribe, and all the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations on whose traditional lands I study and work. I want to start by sharing, I'm a little nervous. I was going to present with some farm workers that we work with very closely out of Skagit and Whatcom County. Unfortunately, over the weekend, there was a lot of flooding that happened up in that area, and so they're working on their homes at the moment, and so they weren't able to come down here. So without them here, I have embedded a couple of different video stories to help bring their voices into this room. I think maybe some of us that have been in this room are also farm workers or of farm worker families, but I think it's important for us here at the university to hear from the actual workers and people that are directly impacted from these different factors related to climate change and other situations. And so there are some videos in there. Hopefully you all won't fall asleep, and I'll keep you engaged. So we'll start with a little bit about me. You all heard a little bit of my background, and these are photos. Whoa, okay, technology. So I always want to start with, this work is very important to me. I am the daughter of farm workers out of Eastern Washington. I was born in Mexico and raised in the small town of Quincy. Growing up in my farm worker community, I was able to see directly and experience some of these impacts, so my work is very, very much personal, and I'm very committed and passionate in making sure that the lives of farm workers, my family, my neighbors, and our community are healthy and are able to live well. But also, I think it's important that we acknowledge that the agriculture industry is a billion-dollar industry in the U.S., yet farm workers are underappreciated or invisible. Many people don't realize that there are workers and families that are directly contributing to the food that's on our table, and that a lot of them are experiencing negative impacts on their health. And so I'm hoping that this presentation will help highlight some of those experiences from them, but also the strength and the courage and the hard work that comes from agricultural communities. And I think, and these slides I think will be available to you all. So farm workers, as I mentioned, are the foundation of the U.S. food system. And however, they're excluded from a lot of different legal protections that apply to other labor-related occupations. And this, some people ask, how do we change the conversation about climate change with farm workers? And I think that the fight against climate change can't ignore the root cause of the systemic racism and exploitation that have marginalized and endangered farm workers for so long. There are reasons why they have been excluded from protections that other labor-related occupations have. And I think that that's something that we must start to have conversations on and start to challenge and question why that's occurring and why is it still occurring in 2020. So to start, I will share this one video, and let's see if technology is going to help or work with us today. Yay. Okay.
Nuestro trabajo, el trabajo que nosotros hacemos es la vida. Porque nosotros plantamos una planta que dé fruta para que coma la gente, para tener fuerza, para tener salud, para tener energía, para poder sobrevivir. Nosotros, nuestras manos, plantamos y limpiamos y cosechamos la fruta. Entonces el trabajo que nosotros estamos haciendo es la vida de todo el país.
Yo soy de Oaxaca y hablo mixteco y la gente indígena que vienen aquí a trabajar, somos gente, hay gente que habla triqui, mixteco, zapoteco, yo hablo mixteco. Pues la vida es bien pobreza, en mi pueblo es bien pobreza en Oaxaca y pues venimos aquí por necesidad.
Es el extra que hay ahorita, la poda y la poda almendra, de pistacho, de todo, de durazno, netarín, lo que hay ahorita son podas. O porque temporada cada año, pues cuando acaba trabajo aquí, no exactamente que no acaba, sino que cuando viene el tiempo de calor y pues casi nos acostumbramos mucho al calor, por eso vamos para Washington. En temporada ya cuando baja el calor y regresamos otra vez, pues ahí tenemos trabajo todo y pues el gasto también es alto ir para allá y pues luego llegando allá pues mal vivienda y pues mal pago y no es justo.
Toda nuestra gente indígena, todo pues los que no hablan español y todo pues tienen, porque no hay facilidad de defenderse.
Como podemos ir ahí a la calle por su cuenta y nos reporte allá.
Tenemos que trabajar de rodillas y lloviendo y cansado de la espalda o de la cintura o de los hombros, así, para ganar dinero.
La verdad es un trabajo muy matado. Está comprobado científicamente que un trabajador de campo no pasamos de 50 años. Si empiezas un decir de los 15 años en el campo, no pasas de 50. ¿Por qué? Porque es un trabajo muy pesado. Pónganse a pensar poquito, esta gente trabaja para su familia, pero también trabaja para que todos comamos. Yo pienso que ya es tiempo de hacer algo. La gente del campo es la única gente que somos discriminados día con día, tenemos que aguantar discriminación, maltratos en la comunidad y en el trabajo. Pienso que es poco de respetar a la gente. Siempre hay un tiempo donde hay una oportunidad, donde puedes hacer algo por alguien y hay que tratar de hacerlo.
Por eso yo quiero, si es posible, que haya unas leyes que protejan los campesinos. No es por mí, aún va a ser por mi niño que está allí. Tengo 3. Eso va a ser para los futuros.
I think I figured the technology out. Okay, so that is one video that was created in collaboration with Community Development, which is an organization out of Skagit, Whatcom counties. I'll talk a little bit about them. I'll highlight, sorry, I'm going to try to figure out where I should stand. I'll highlight I'm going to stand on this side. I'll highlight them in a project as a case study example that I'll share with you all of one community academic partnership project that I was very fortunate to work with, and some of my colleagues that are in the room as well. So agriculture in Washington State. I think one of the questions that I think some people submitted to us were, how do we talk about climate change and farm workers? And I think that we need to first understand what are and who are the farm workers in Washington State and the agricultural industry in our state. And so, as you can all tell, outside of the Seattle and Emerald Corridor, or along the Emerald Corridor, you may not see a lot of agriculture, high agriculture production, but if you go up north or to the east side, you will notice that there's a lot more agricultural crops being grown. But it is, again, as I mentioned, a billion-dollar industry here in our state. And farmer characteristics. So in Washington State, I think this data is from 2017. So hopefully with the new census this year, we'll have updated stats. But it's 53% are non-white, 40% identify as Hispanic or Latinx. Most agricultural workers in Washington State are male, foreign-born, and work long hours and rotate different employers, which means that depending on the crop that they're working in, they may be working at different employer sites, but maybe working on the same crop. And they have limited English proficiency. So as you heard in this video, there are farm workers who speak indigenous languages. The Skagit Whatcom area have a higher percentage. So in the study that that I'll share later on, 40% of our participants spoke indigenous languages: Triqui, Mixteco, Coracholan. Most of these languages and indigenous groups come from the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, but also out of Central America. And so the vulnerability of individuals who their Spanish is their second language makes it even more challenging, right? Trying to communicate hazards or training can make it very difficult for them. This weekend, as part of my research study, I'm helping participants create digital participant-created stories. And we had 3 workers in the room who only spoke Mixteco, and it made it very, very challenging for me as a researcher to try to engage with them. But we had interpreters there. And I think it was really powerful to see their stories in their primary language, and also understand that Spanish is my first language, and I didn't understand anything that they were saying. And so for me to assume that if I translate my materials into Spanish and they're going to understand what I'm trying to say comes from a very ignorant place on my part, which I think has been very, very opening for me in realizing that there are vulnerabilities even amongst the agricultural community. The other piece is many of them migrate for employment opportunities. So as you saw these workers are workers that we worked with in our project. They're out of Skagit, Whatcom County, but they also migrate from California. Depending on the crop that they're working on, many of them follow the same crop. So the workers out of Skagit and Whatcom primarily follow the crop of berries and berry picking. And I think the other piece to highlight is that farm work is a skilled labor. So it takes a lot to know which and how to pick the crop. So when I was growing up, I was picking apples. And the first day that I went in there, I thought you picked every single apple that was on the tree. But it was actually a technique of how you pick that apple so you don't bruise it, because ultimately on our side, as a consumer, you want the quality apple, right? So on the worker side, you have to learn how to pick carefully so that you don't bruise it, but also quickly because you need to make money. And most of that work, at least in the apple picking crop, is paid by the piece rate. So I think a lot of you are public health or in the nutritional studies, or maybe not, but I think many of you have heard about the social ecological model, which describes health, the relationship of health for an individual at the individual level, which is at the center. Let's see if this works. And then the individual lifestyles factors, right? So in the center are like age, sex, and hereditary factors, and then individual lifestyles, so like smoking or working out, eating healthy. And then you have the social and community networks, which can be where you live, right? The places where you live or work. And then you have these higher level, more policy, societal impacts on your health. And unfortunately, a lot of these things don't work in isolation, right? So a lot of these are cumulative exposures and cumulative health effects, right? And I'm sorry, this slide is like very hard to read. So in here, specific to agricultural workers, you have their environmental occupational risks, the structural and systemic barriers, and then you have social, economic, and political vulnerability. So what are some of the ones that affect farm workers? We have low wages, which are all the ones that you already kind of shared on your poll over, right? Pesticide exposure, extreme heat, substandard housing, lack of access to clean water, inadequate food access, and access to health care. I think one note that I'll point out to the inadequate food access is that a lot of us, especially from farm worker communities, you would assume that we would have access to healthy food, but in reality, a lot of the agriculture communities are in rural areas which have, although they're producing a lot of the food, access to food, quality food, is very limited, right? And so there have been a lot of different types of programming to bring like farmers markets and other types of programs to try to allow for people to have access to healthy foods. In the area that we were doing the study this summer was very rural Whatcom County, and there was one grocery store, and it wasn't really even a grocery store, it was a little stand that had limited fresh fruits and vegetables. If they wanted to go get groceries, like at a Safeway or Walmart, they had to drive almost an hour or over an hour to get access to that type of food. And so pesticide, I think the readings really highlighted some really good points on pesticides, so I'm just gonna speak to a couple of them, because we have another video. Farm workers and their families face immediate and long-term health effects from pesticides. So even if a farm worker there's some farm workers that have higher exposure to pesticides if they're applicators, but also indirect exposure, having worked on the farm, but also their proximity of their homes next to the farm, the fields, right? So a lot of farm workers, there's different types of housing, which I didn't highlight in here, but there's housing that is employer-sponsored, which means that a lot of them are living really next to the field that they're working in. And so they face other types of exposure to pesticides than ones that might live in town, for example. And then also, I'll switch to the next one. Heat-related risks for farm workers. I think that the article that was shared in class really highlighted some really good points and efforts that are being done in different states. So I think that one came out of Florida. But ultimately, working out in agriculture in the summer, I think it's it's kind of like a double jeopardy for farm workers, that harvest season also coincides in the highest summer temperatures. And so they have a higher risk of experiencing heat-related illness due to their heavy physical labor, working outside, and then also working in these high temperatures. Unfortunately, there's also very limited education that they receive on how to prevent heat-related illness. And so there are a lot of programs now and projects and research projects that are trying to address that gap. And then wildfire. So I think a lot of you may have recognized, unfortunately you can't really see it, but this photo went viral over the summer of, I think it was last summer, 2 summers ago. And you can see the workers themselves here, and then this is a hill, and then this is all the smoke, right? And so wildfire is a newer issue that's affecting farm workers. Unfortunately, again, it coincides with the prime harvest season and higher exposure to wildfire smoke due to working outdoors, right? So with heat, for example, in the cherry picking season, workers will work earlier in the morning, so they'll start working at like 3 a.m. and then are done by 11, so that the temperature around noon isn't impacting them. But with smoke, you can't really avoid it, right? And I think last week we heard from Tanya and Nicole on housing inside of your home, right? The type of quality of air inside of your home versus outside. So with farm workers, it's kind of difficult to, how do you protect yourself from wildfire smoke when it's prime season of picking apples or cherries? And so I think that there are some researchers out of UW that are trying to figure out ways to help improve that for them. And then also limited communication on emergency preparedness and education. So I think the Unfair Share report highlighted the anecdotal stories that were shared in one of the listening sessions. I can actually speak to that. My last project that I worked on when I was working in Eastern Washington, I worked at a clinic doing outreach and education to farm workers. During that time, this was 2014, 2015, it was the summer that had extreme wildfires happening all over the place, right? I don't know if some of you will remember, but in our county, in the Columbia Basin, there's a lot of different messaging that happens around wildfire smoke, or wildfires in general, right? Evacuation routes, what you should do, how you should stay safe. And what we were realizing, not only the English community didn't really understand what those levels of evacuation were, but they weren't even translated into Spanish. And so a lot of us had to organize very quickly to realize, to try to put pressure on communicating these results or these emergency evacuation routes in Spanish. But ultimately also, we had to mobilize our community because and I'll show another video of H2A workers, which is a newer group of agricultural workers in Washington State that are contracted, live in very isolated areas. And so the fire department, which goes out to evacuate communities during wildfire, didn't realize where they were located. And so they would only communicate to the owner, which is one house, but their homes were in the center of like the orchard, and they didn't realize that they were there. And so we had to group together, organize, and make a map of where they were located in case there was another evacuation that occurred during that time. And then we have a case example that I'll go over. There's a video in there, but I'm going to skip it because there's another video at the end that I think is more important. Again, as I mentioned, I was really, really lucky to work on a community academic partnership project I think that's one of the solutions or one of the recommendations that I would have for all of you as UW students and some that are interested in research is to work with communities, especially communities that are directly impacted on climate change, by climate change. But an ideal partnership would have respect, right? And understanding that communities have so much knowledge to share, and they actually can be the leaders of this type of work in creating sustainable solutions. And so we were very lucky to work with community-to-community development, who is not here, and I wish they would have been here also, but they're also organizing. Quick plug-in, on Monday is Latino Legislative Day in Olympia, and there's also a farm worker tribunal that happens in the evening where farm workers are able to give their testimony and directly to policy folks in Olympia to try to make some changes. And so they are busily working on organizing that. And so my dissertation work has a very long name, Restoring Community Environmental Assessments. I will be utilizing data from this survey that we created in the summer where we worked with community promotores or community trusted members. And we were able to survey 348 surveys, which may not seem like a lot, but it was a lot of work. One, because I'm an outsider, right? But even the promotores that we were working with, it was really hard to try to convince someone to give you 10 minutes of their time to, or more, to share kind of the different questions that we were asking. Also, Skagit and Whatcom County, unfortunately, their proximity to the border makes it very, very challenging in the current political climate to try to ask people to share a little bit of what they're experiencing. And so we were able to get 348 surveys. And then also another component to it was doing some housing assessments where we were able to go into their home and assess kind of farm worker housing based on different questions. And then the other component that I mentioned this weekend, I had one of my digital story workshops. So one of the things that for me is really important is there's so much research and so much data out there, yet a lot of that data is just a number, right? And so a lot of us as students that were listening to the data, we don't realize that these are people and these are people's lives. And so for me, it's really important to try to bring in that qualitative data and information and try to humanize and share and use my platform as a student to be able to elevate the voices of farm workers' experiences to try to understand in reality what is actually happening. It's not just that there's limited access to drinking water in the workplace, but there's more to that and what's happening and what are they experiencing. And so one of my components is using digital storytelling. I've had 2 workshops. I have 1 more left. And hopefully someday I'll share with you all what I find. So the demographics of this survey, as I mentioned earlier, the primary spoken language was Spanish, but we did have people who spoke other languages, including Trique and Mixteco. And there's different types of Mixteco. There's Mixteco Alto and Mixteco Bajo. And when I have a conversation with the workers, they said there's even more, because every language changes within the group, within like the neighboring towns. So sometimes even the neighboring town don't understand each other. And then so here's a map that you all can see kind of where it's located in Mexico. And we asked questions about worker-related injuries. I think a lot of you had some questions on that, but I'm going to go ahead and skip because I think you'll be able to understand why people aren't reporting, why aren't they reporting their injuries in their workplace. And here's some of the quotes related to the injuries that we were able to receive in our survey. So I didn't want to report because I have no health insurance and I didn't think I needed to report it. I'm fine now, just if I'm standing for too long, my back starts to hurt. 4 months without working, but paid with employer paid everything. All right, so here are different types of kind of misunderstandings that they have of what workers' compensation is. What do you do when you are injured? And then do I report it? Do I not report it? What does that mean for me missing work? Which means that I will most likely not have a higher paycheck, because unfortunately, as you all read, there are farm workers are excluded from a lot of different types of labor protection. Like I think the article talked about overtime. And then we'll watch one more video. Hopefully this one works.
Estar lejos de la familia es lo más difícil, porque no se puede comunicar con ellos todos los días, pues. De allá donde yo soy no hay señal de teléfono. Mi esposa tiene que ir a ciudad para poder comunicarse y pues lo hace cada 15 días. Cuando se viene mi esposa también se trae los niños y ahí platicamos. Les digo que estoy trabajando acá para sacarlos adelante. Mi nombre es José Juan Calle, soy de Durango, tengo 4 años y es mi primer año aquí en Estados Unidos. Llegué el 7 de enero y el 25 de noviembre acaba el contrato. Se agarra del tubo y que no se le caiga el tubo. Y las hojas, no echar hojas al hoy no trabajo y por eso pues me vine acá a buscar trabajo aquí en los Estados Unidos. Tengo 3 niños, viven allá en Durango. El más grande tiene 13 años. El mediano es una niña, tiene 6 años y de 2 años, la más chica. Mando dinero cada 15 días, $700 a veces. Si me va bien, si no, es unos 500. Allá pagan 150 pesos mexicanos. Y aquí pues sí rinde el dinero. Nos pagan la 15, 16, algo así. Pues depende las cubetas que llenemos, eso nos pagan. Si hace unos 20, 30, va bien. El patrón nos proporciona unas cabinas aquí, ahí nos quedamos. Somos 4 en el cuarto. Siempre ahí vivimos tranquilos y como son compañeros de cuarto, pues ahí platicamos, reímos, comemos chistes. Llego y hago de comer, me baño y a descansar un rato y a dormir a las 8 de la noche. 4 de la mañana preparo el desayuno y de ahí preparo para salir a trabajar. Ya llego aquí, pues ya le echa ganas en el trabajo. Y está bien, muy bien. Aquí echándole ganas.
So I believe that video is a part of a series on PBS that I think you all, if you're interested, could probably go back and watch some more videos on related to different topics. I think it's like a series, but this one continues. It's a part of a longer video. So as you heard the story from this farm worker, he is a H-2A contracted worker, which is Washington State is the third leading state in the U.S. that has contracted workers. These are workers that are primarily coming out of Mexico, but there are H-2A contracted workers coming from other parts, like Jamaica, for example. And last year, actually, one of the successes related to policy change, I think a lot of you had some questions on what are some of the current policy changes that workers are working on. And last year, in 2019, SB 5438 out of the state passed. And this is to provide, it's a bill that would fund the establishment of an office specifically related to monitoring labor, housing, health and safety requirements for farms using the H-2A visa program, as well as prioritizing outreach to domestic farm workers prior to using the H-2A program. So this was one of the biggest successes for farm workers who were organizing to try to bring safety and protection to H-2A workers in our state, primarily community-to-community development, which I mentioned earlier is our community partner that we've been working with, was one of the leaders in this. And they got involved after the death. I don't know if many of you were aware of this, but in 2017, there was a death of a 28-year-old migrant worker, Ernesto Silva Ibarra, out of Sarbanan Farms. And that farm was fined $149,800 for not providing required breaks, meal periods, and the fine was actually later reduced to, I don't remember the amount. And so a lot of farm worker organizers in our state came up to try to provide some type of support and policy, systemic changes to try to protect some of these workers who are very, very much vulnerable, living in isolated areas, also not having connection to communities, community resources, because they are in isolated areas where they are provided housing from their employer and transportation, but that doesn't mean that they are provided transportation if they want to come into town for a community event. They're brought into town for grocery shopping, primarily like twice a week, and then bused back into the labor camp. And so I think a lot of people ask questions around mental health and psychological stressors that farm workers face, and I think that the H-2A workers are one of the I think most farm workers face a lot of different types of stressors, but H-2A workers in reality are some that are even more vulnerable to some of these stressors given their distance from their family and being able to connect with other community members because they are brought as single people. And I think I'm almost out of time. Okay, so again, I think one of the messages that I want to leave you all with is that farm workers recognize themselves as an indispensable part of the Washington agricultural economy. So as you saw in these videos, farm workers they know that their worth, and they know that they are that they have their how can I say this? I think ultimately farm workers have the leadership and the strengths to be able to make some of these changes happen. And I think that it's our responsibility as future leaders to be able to create those opportunities for them to be involved and being a part of the decision-making process. And also, I think that there's a big need for Congress and policy to end the exclusion of farm workers in a lot of these protections, but also trying to enforce and support farm workers across the country, right? So as we saw in the article, there's some different states have different types of protections, and so I think it's important that there is a more over the U.S. Policies that protect farm workers. And yeah, I think that's my last message to you all.
Thank you so much, Maria. You covered so much. I want to just open up the floor. Are there questions for Maria at this time? You had great questions that you submitted beforehand. Is there a question that you feel like you put out there before the lecture or that came up to you during the presentation that you'd like a little more detail on? Yes.
So you said that Washington was like one of the few, or third state or something that was putting laws in place. Are there any regulations in those other states at all
For H-2A workers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, Washington State is the third largest, or is the state to bring in the largest number of H-2A workers? Are there other states that have similar protections? I believe I'm a little outdated on all of the information related to protections around H-2A workers, but I think the other state that has done some more formalized protections has been North Carolina, who is the leading state. I think it's Florida, North Carolina, then us. Yeah, that was one of the questions that came up, and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to recommend us individually, right? But I think that I think the most important thing that we can do as students, especially, is that there's a lot that we can do as a consumer, and I think a lot of you had questions and have provided some insights on what you can do. But I think that as an individual and as a student, there's as we're leaving the university, I think that this class has a lot of students from different departments and different fields, and so as we're leaving the university, trying to, whatever field you go into, trying to find opportunities that engage communities in front, especially frontline communities, I think is going to be the most important piece that we can do. And also with farm workers, I think it's starting to question and challenge some of those issues that we're seeing in the news, that we see in our state. I think that that's the biggest thing that we can do, is to ask the simple question of why, and why is that happening, and why is it happening to that group? Or why am I not hearing about it, I think is even the better question that we should start asking. Yeah.
Your last slide had a bullet point that said engaging farm workers in kind of developing sustainable solutions. Do you know of any examples just off the top of your head of how that has been done well or not been done well recently?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different examples. And off the top of my head, the project that we're working on is directly engaging farm workers in the process of collecting their own data, which I think is really powerful as a research institute that allows for the communities that are directly impacted to ask the questions that they have, and then us sharing our resources and our capacity to be able to collect that data that then informs policy, right? And so I think that there's a lot of different organizations across the state that are working on different topics and different themes. I think that there's a lot the university is doing. They just got designation, right, for working with communities. And so I think that there are a lot of different programs. Yeah.
Any last questions? I know you mentioned, Maria, that you have some of your colleagues here. Yeah, and so is there any final statement you want to say about what you're working toward and kind of what you shared the timeline for doing another one of the gatherings and collecting more stories? Where will those stories be banked, and how will you use those stories to elevate those voices?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question from the university and my committee, is asking, what are you going to do with this? But I think as a true community based project, I'm working with the community directly to figure out what is it that they want to do with these stories. I think the most beautiful part of this project that I'm working on with the digital stories is that the workers are able to come out of a workshop with a video and with something that's tangible that they can then share and choose to who they share that with. And so a lot of them have been dedicating their stories to their families, for example, their children. And so I think that in itself is impactful. And what we do after that, I think, is just extra, right? So if we are able to change some policy, then that would be amazing. But I think that for them to be able to share their stories with their family or those who they want to share with, I think in itself is very powerful.
Thank you so much. It was an incredible discussion about how powerful stories can be and the importance of elevating stories of underrepresented voices. Thank you so much for that rich presentation. Everyone, let's join Maria in thanking and appreciating the work here. That was fantastic. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much. That was amazing.